They drag her out of the family gala like she was nothing, like she didn't belong, while his mistress stood there dripping in her jewelry, as if she'd always owned it. And the worst part was his entire family just watched. No, not just watched, they laughed, openly, cruelly, like this was entertainment, like Simone Carter's humiliation was the main event of the night. Security didn't hesitate. They took her by the arms and escorted her out under those glowing chandeliers, past the whispers and sideways glances, until the grand door shut behind her and the cold air hit her face. But what happened next was something no one inside that ballroom could have imagined, because just as she stumbled into the parking lot trying to hold herself together, a convoy of sleek black cars rolled in and surrounded her. Engines humming low, doors opening in perfect sync, and out stepped a sharply dressed CEO who walked straight toward her and bowed his head with a level of respect she hadn't seen in years, his voice steady as he said, "Ma'am, your real family is here." And in that moment, everything shifted. But to understand why, you have to go back, because this story doesn't start in that parking lot. It starts with a woman who had no idea who she really was. Simone Carter, quiet, loyal, the kind of woman who gave everything and asked for nothing, walked into the Whitmore Foundation Gala that night, completely unaware that her life was about to split in two, the ballroom glowing in gold and ivory, filled with powerful people dressed to impress, where reputations were built and broken in a single conversation, and she didn't quite fit in with her simple navy dress from 3 years ago, carefully pressed, her hair pinned neatly, her posture proud only because her husband Darnell had insisted this night mattered for his career, a man who had been pulling away from her for months, growing colder, distant, coming home late with excuses that didn't quite land, carrying a scent that didn't belong to her. But Simone ignored the signs like so many people do when love starts turning into something unrecognizable, until she saw him across the room, standing too close to a woman she didn't know, laughing too easily, his hand resting where it shouldn't. And what truly stopped her heart wasn't just the intimacy. It was the emerald necklace resting against that woman's skin, her grandmother's necklace, the last piece of Simone's past, worn like a trophy by a stranger who smiled as Simone approached, not kindly but knowingly, like she'd already won. And when Simone finally spoke Darnell's name, his reaction wasn't guilt or shock but irritation, like she had ruined something he no longer cared to hide. And Rochelle Banks, because that was her name, let out a soft laugh that cut deeper than any insult, making it clear without saying much that Simone was no longer part of this picture. And just when Simone thought the betrayal couldn't get worse, that was when his family stepped in, not to defend her, but to stand beside him, reinforcing the lie, turning their backs on her as if she had imagined the entire marriage. And in that moment, surrounded by wealth and power, yet completely alone, Simone realized something devastating. She had never truly belonged in their world, but what she didn't realize yet, what no one in that room could have predicted, was that she didn't belong there because she came from something far greater, something they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives trying to destroy. Before Simone could even process what was happening, the humiliation escalated into something far worse, because Darnell's family didn't just stand by. They closed in on her like vultures circling something already wounded. His mother Loretta arrived first, covered in diamonds, her lips curled in open disgust, followed by his brother Kenneth, tall and arrogant in a suit that screamed money. And then Vanessa, already filming with her phone like this was content instead of someone's life falling apart. And as Darnell cleared his throat, the room slowly quieted, conversations fading as eyes turned toward them, hundreds of them, all locking onto Simone as if she'd suddenly become the spectacle of the night, her chest tightening, her breath catching, her body frozen while her world unraveled in real time. And then Darnell spoke, his voice smooth and deliberate as it carried across the ballroom. "Everyone, I want you to meet someone very special. Rochelle Banks, my business partner and the woman I'm going to marry." And just like that, the air shifted, the silence hitting harder than any scream as Simone felt the ground slip beneath her, staring at the man she had loved for years, the man she sacrificed everything for, working herself to exhaustion just to support his dreams, standing by him when Even his own family doubted him, and now all she saw was a stranger wearing his face. "Darnell, we're married," she managed to whisper, her voice fragile, breaking under the weight of disbelief. But Loretta stepped in before he could respond, her tone sharp and merciless as she dismissed Simone like she was nothing more than an inconvenience, calling her a placeholder, a practice wife, someone they had tolerated until someone worthy came along, gesturing proudly toward Rochelle as if she were the upgrade Simone was always meant to be replaced by, while Kenneth laughed openly, mocking her past, her struggles, her very existence, reducing her to nothing with every word. And Vanessa moved even closer, her camera capturing every tear, every crack in Simone's composure, already imagining the viral moment this would become. And through it all, Simone kept looking at Darnell, waiting, hoping, begging silently for him to say something, to stop this, to remember the life they had built together. But his eyes were empty, cold, detached, and when he finally spoke, it wasn't to defend her. It was to erase her, calling security without hesitation, ordering them to remove this woman, as if she were a stranger trespassing in a place she once called her own. And still Simone didn't fight, didn't scream, even as tears streamed down her face. Because somewhere deep inside, she was still holding onto the last thread of dignity she had left, standing there in her modest dress while everything she believed in was torn apart in front of a crowd that chose silence over humanity. And then Rochelle stepped forward, close enough for Simone to smell the expensive perfume that now clung to what used to be her life, raising her champagne glass in a gesture that looked almost celebratory before slowly pouring it onto the floor at Simone's feet, the liquid splashing over her worn shoes as she delivered the final insult in a voice far too sweet for something so cruel, making it clear exactly where she believed Simone belonged. And the crowd reacted with gasps and whispers, phones lifting, eyes watching, but no one intervened, no one stepped in. And as the guards took Simone by the arms and guided her out, her last glimpse of the ballroom was Darnell pulling Rochelle close and kissing her in full view of everyone. The emerald necklace, her grandmother's necklace, catching the light as if mocking her. The memory of her grandmother's voice echoing in her mind, reminding her of its meaning, its history, a legacy Simone had unknowingly handed over months ago when she trusted the wrong man. And as the grand door shut behind her and the cool night air wrapped around her trembling body, she stood alone in the nearly empty parking lot, abandoned, broken, and stripped of everything she thought defined her, while the guards walked away without a word, except for one older man who paused just long enough to quietly ask if she was okay, his voice carrying something unexpected, something almost like respect, as if he knew something she didn't, as if this wasn't the end of her story, but the moment right before everything changed, too broken to even notice the shift happening around her. Simone stood there alone in the parking lot, mascara streaking down her cheeks, her entire body trembling like it might give out at any second, and with shaking hands she reached in her small purse and pulled out the only thing that had ever truly been hers, a worn, brown leather journal, cracked with age and heavy with everything she had spent years avoiding. The same journal her grandmother, Estelle, had pressed in her hands 6 years earlier on her deathbed, whispering with urgency despite her fading strength. "When you're ready, baby, read it. Your truth is inside. Your daddy loved you. He just couldn't stay. But he never forgot you." Words Simone had buried deep because opening that journal meant facing a past she wasn't sure she could survive, and she had spent her whole life being nobody's daughter, nobody's first choice, convincing herself that not knowing hurt less than knowing the truth, but standing there now, humiliated, abandoned, stripped of everything. Something inside her finally broke open, and she clutched the journal to her chest as the realization hit her hard that sometimes you have to lose everything before you're ready to find what was always yours. And that's when she heard it, the low, controlled hum of engines approaching, steady and deliberate, pulling her out of her grief as she looked up to see 5 black SUVs gliding into the lot in perfect formation, surrounding the space with a precision that didn't belong to security or hotel staff, but something far more calculated, something powerful, and her breath caught as the center vehicle came to a stop directly in front of her, the back door opening slowly as an elderly black man stepped out, his presence commanding in a way that silenced even the whispers of the small crowd that had followed her outside. His silver hair sharp against the night, his tailored suit flawless, his posture, carrying both authority and something deeper, something personal. And then it hit her. She had seen him before, inside the ballroom, standing quietly in the corner, watching everything unfold while making a call, just as she was being dragged out. And now he was walking straight toward her, each step measured, intentional, until he stopped just inches away, and in front of everyone watching, he did something that made Simone's heart stutter. He bowed, not casually, not politely, but deeply, with respect reserved for someone of importance, his voice thick with emotion as he spoke words that didn't make sense yet somehow felt like they carried the weight of a lifetime. "Ma'am, your real family is here." And just like that, the story shifted again, because what happened next couldn't be understood without going back to a small, forgotten town in Georgia 25 years earlier, where a little girl named Simone was raised by her grandmother in a house so small you could touch both walls at once, a life built on struggle and quiet strength after her mother died giving birth to her, leaving Estelle to raise her alone with nothing but determination and love, refusing to speak much about Simone's father except to insist he was a good man with reasons too big to explain, a man who couldn't stay but never stopped loving his daughter. And though their home was tiny, with barely enough space to live and a kitchen that could hardly hold one person, Estelle kept it spotless, working tirelessly as a seamstress late into the night, while Simone studied by candlelight when the power was cut. Their meals often simple and repetitive, but always shared with warmth. And through it all, Estelle filled that small space with something greater than hardship, humming gospel songs as her hands stitched fabric, reminding Simone again and again that even without wealth they had dignity, grace, and love, things money could never guarantee. And it was in that environment Simone learned to appreciate the smallest joys, a pencil, a piece of candy, the golden light spilling through their window each morning, never realizing that the truth about her life, her identity, and everything she thought she knew had been sitting quietly inside that old journal all along, waiting for the moment she would finally be broken enough to open it, that learned to be gentle with the world because it had never been gentle with her. And she refused to pass that same cruelty on, but life tested that softness early when she was just 12 and Estelle got sick, the kind of sickness that doesn't wait, that doesn't care how strong or good you are. And Simone watched helplessly as the woman who had been her entire world slowly faded, growing weaker by the day until she barely recognized her. And on her final night, Estelle called Simone close, her voice fragile, but her grip still firm as she told her about the leather journal hidden away, revealing a truth that shook Simone to her core, that her father had written to her every single year, that he had watched from a distance, loved her in silence, but stayed away because dangerous people would have used her to get to him. And hearing that shattered something inside young Simone, tears falling as she asked why she had been kept in the dark, only for Estelle to explain that she needed Simone to grow up strong on her own, not dependent on a man, not waiting to be saved. And with her final breath, she told her that when the time came, when she truly needed to understand who she was, the answers would be waiting in that journal. And then she was gone, leaving Simone alone in a world that suddenly felt too big and too cold, passed into the care of a distant cousin who saw her as a burden rather than family, forcing her to grow up fast, to fight for everything she had, pushing through school on sheer determination until she earned her way into community college where she met Darnell Carter, a man who at the time seemed like everything she had been missing, charming, driven, attentive in a way no one had ever been toward her, making her feel seen, chosen, important. And when he proposed after 2 years, she said yes without hesitation because she believed she had finally found where she belonged, all while that journal remained hidden away, untouched, each year tempting her with the truth she was too afraid to face. Because what if her father wasn't who she hoped he was? What if the truth hurt more than the emptiness she had learned to live with? So instead, she poured everything into her marriage, working tirelessly to support Darnell while he built his future, enduring his family's quiet insults and open disrespect, especially from Loretta, who never let her forget she didn't measure up. And over time, Simone began to shrink, silencing her own dreams, accepting less, convincing herself that love meant sacrifice even when it started costing her everything. But the harder she tried, the less Darnell valued her, until he no longer saw her as a partner, but as someone beneath him, someone replaceable. And by the time Rochelle entered his life, bold, confident, unapologetically everything Simone had trained herself not to be, it was already over because Rochelle didn't wait for permission or respect boundaries. She saw what she wanted and took it, and Darnell, already drifting, didn't resist, letting the affair begin quietly at first, in small moments that felt harmless until they weren't, until those moments turned into something that would ultimately destroy everything Simone thought she had built at late-night work sessions. Turned into excuses, business dinners stretched into something else entirely. And before long, Rochelle wasn't just a secret. She was showing up everywhere, even at family gatherings where Loretta welcomed her with open arms, praising her openly in front of Simone as the kind of woman who could actually elevate Darnell's life, unlike the quiet little thing he had settled for, while Kenneth backed it up with talk of Rochelle's powerful connections and influential family, making it painfully clear that in their eyes Simone came from nothing and meant even less. And Vanessa made it worse by turning it all into a spectacle online, posting curated photos of Darnell and Rochelle like they were some flawless power couple, rewriting reality while Simone watched her own marriage being erased in real time. And when she finally confronted Darnell, hoping for honesty, for some shred of truth, he dismissed her coldly, calling her paranoid, accusing her of embarrassing herself. And even though every instinct inside her screamed otherwise, Simone stayed quiet because accepting the truth meant accepting that the man she had built her life around had already abandoned her, and that silence carried her all the way to the gala, where everything exploded. But the real nightmare began after, because the following week stripped away any illusion she had left. Darnell moved Rochelle into their home without hesitation, into the space Simone had built piece by piece while sacrificing her own dreams, forcing her into the smallest guest room like she was an afterthought, telling her bluntly that she was only still there out of pity because she had nowhere else to go, no family, no money, no options, while Rochelle paraded through the house like it already belonged to her, wearing Simone's clothes, using her things, and most painfully of all, wearing that emerald necklace every single day like a constant reminder of everything Simone had lost, taunting her with quiet cruelty that cut deeper than shouting ever could. And slowly Simone began to disappear, not in some dramatic collapse, but in a quiet, suffocating way, losing her appetite, her sleep, her sense of self as she lay awake at night, listening to laughter echo from the room that used to be hers, until even that pain became routine, until the day Loretta arrived with divorce papers and placed them in front of her like a final insult, offering her a small payout as if it could compensate for everything they had taken, while Kenneth stood nearby, making it clear that if she fought back they would destroy what little reputation she had left, twisting the narrative until she became the villain in her own story, and Vanessa ensured the world saw it that way, broadcasting their version online, where strangers and so-called friends mocked her, reduced her to a joke. But even that public humiliation wasn't the worst of it. It was what happened behind closed doors, because Rochelle wasn't just replacing her, she was setting her up, carefully planting evidence to make Simone look unstable, orchestrating small incidents that painted her as dangerous, manipulative, obsessed. And Darnell believed it all without question, looking at Simone like she was someone he'd never known, someone he needed to remove from his life completely. Until one day, 2 months after the gala, Simone came home early and walked straight into the master bedroom, the room that once held her entire world, and found them there together without a trace of shame. And when Darnell looked at her not with guilt but with irritation, asking why she was still there, as if she were the intruder, something inside Simone finally broke. Not weakly, not quietly, but completely, like a switch flipping after years of being pushed too far, not violently, not in some dramatic explosion, but in a quiet, almost invisible way, like a branch that finally gives under too much weight. Simone broke, and instead of screaming or fighting, she simply turned away, her body moving on autopilot as she walked down the hallway and collapsed onto the floor of the guest room. Lying there for hours, staring at the ceiling with nothing left inside her. No tears, no anger, just a hollow numbness that made her feel like maybe they had been right all along, like maybe she really was nobody. But later that night, when the house fell silent and Darnell's distant snoring echoed through the walls, something small but powerful stirred within her, and she reached under the bed for the one box she had refused to let go of, pulling out the worn leather journal her grandmother had left her, her hands trembling as those final words echoed in her mind. When you're ready. Your truth is waiting. And this time she didn't hesitate. She opened it, her breath catching as she read the first letter dated the day she was born, written in strong, deliberate handwriting from a man who called her his daughter, confessing that he had held her for only minutes before being forced to let her go after losing the love of his life. Her mother, to protect her from powerful enemies who would have used her against him, revealing that he had watched her from afar every year of her life, loving her in silence, and ending with words that shook her to her core, that she was not alone, that she was loved, that she was his, and that made her royalty. And as Simone turned the pages with tears streaming down her face, reading letter after letter written on every birthday she had ever had, the truth unfolded into something she could barely comprehend. Her father was Theodore Whitmore, the billionaire founder of Whitmore Enterprises, a man whose name carried power, influence, and fear in equal measure, a man who had been watching her all along. And the final letter, written just 3 months earlier, made everything even more unreal as he told her. She was finally old enough to know the truth, that his enemies were gone, that the empire he had built, worth billions, was hers if she wanted it, that he would never force his way into her life but would be waiting if she chose him, reminding her that her worth had never been defined by how others treated her. And at the bottom of the page sat a single phone number that suddenly felt heavier than everything she had endured. And for a long moment, Simone just stared at it, torn between fear and longing, until the sound of laughter from the other room, Rochelle's voice, Darnell responding like nothing had ever happened, cut through her hesitation. And in that instant, something inside her didn't break again. It sharpened into clarity, into resolve, and she picked up her phone and dialed, her heart pounding as it rang only once before a man answered, his voice deep, warm, and strangely familiar as he said her name, like he had been waiting his entire life to say it. And though her voice barely worked, she managed to ask if it was real, and his answer came without hesitation, every word carrying truth and emotion as he told her he had been waiting 30 years for that call. And that night, they spoke for hours as he told her everything. The love story with her mother, the danger that had forced him to stay away, the enemies he had spent decades eliminating to keep her safe, and the empire he had built not just out of ambition but out of loss, explaining that his company spanned industries from tech to real estate to media, that it was worth billions, and that more than half of it had been placed in her name the day she was born, waiting for the moment she would claim it. And though Simone struggled to process the reality of what that meant, the truth settled in slowly but powerfully. She was not the woman they had reduced her to. She was something far greater. And as their conversation ended, they made a plan, because in 2 weeks Darnell and Rochelle would be hosting an engagement party in the same ballroom where Simone had been humiliated. And this time, she wouldn't be the woman being thrown out. She would be the one everyone else had to answer to. We'll make an entrance they'll never forget, he told her, his voice steady but giving her the choice. And for a moment, Simone considered walking away, taking the money, disappearing somewhere no one knew her name, starting fresh, without the weight of everything that had been done to her. But then she thought about her grandmother, about every moment she had made herself smaller just to fit into spaces that were never meant for her, and something inside her refused to run anymore. So she lifted her chin and said she was ready to show them the truth. And the next 2 weeks moved like a storm. She couldn't slow down even if she tried. as Theodore surrounded her with experts, stylists who transformed her appearance, lawyers who explained the legal reality of her power, accountants who broke down numbers so large they barely felt real, billions tied to her name, properties across continents, influence she had never imagined. And yet what changed her the most wasn't the money. It was the realization that she finally understood who she was, that her worth had never been tied to anyone else's approval. And when she met Theodore in person for the first time at his estate, stepping out into a world that felt like something out of a dream, all the strength she had been holding together broke into something softer as she saw him standing there. A man who looked like her in ways that made the truth undeniable, and she collapsed into his arms, years of pain pouring out as he held her and apologized for the life he couldn't give her, reminding her that surviving without losing her kindness wasn't weakness, but the rarest kind of strength. And they spent hours going through memories he had quietly collected over the years, photos of moments she thought no one had witnessed, revealing that he had always been there, even on her wedding day, watching from a distance, knowing even then that something wasn't right, but forcing himself to let her find her own path. And when the night of the engagement party finally arrived, Simone stood in front of the mirror transformed, wearing a royal blue gown that carried presence and power, her hair and makeup flawless, a diamond ring on her hand bearing her father's initials, a symbol of everything she had reclaimed. And though Theodore gently reminded her she didn't have to go through with it, that they could leave it all behind, Simone knew this wasn't about revenge. It was about truth, about showing every person who had witnessed her humiliation that the story didn't end there, that being broken didn't mean being finished. And so they arrived in a convoy that mirrored the night everything changed, stepping into the same ballroom where she had been discarded. Only this time the room fell silent for a different reason, because Simone didn't walk in as the woman they had mocked. She walked in with presence, with power, with something undeniable that made every eye follow her. And Darnell was the first to react, his expression unraveling as he tried to process what he was seeing, demanding to know why she was there, clinging to control by mentioning the restraining order, only for Simone to calmly dismantle that illusion with a quiet confidence that carried across the room, revealing it had already been dismissed due to falsified evidence, exposing Rochelle's manipulation in a way that shifted the atmosphere instantly. And as Rochelle's composure cracked and Darnell instinctively distanced himself from her, the balance of power began to tilt. But it was Loretta's outrage that pushed everything to its peak, demanding answers, demanding authority, only to be met with something far greater when Theodore stepped forward, his presence alone silencing the room as recognition spread like wildfire. And with a calm certainty, he made it clear that this space belonged to him, that Simone belonged there, and then delivered the truth that shattered everything they thought they knew, introducing Simone not as the woman they had discarded, but as his daughter, his heir, the majority shareholder of his empire. And in that moment, the same crowd that had once watched her fall now stood frozen, forced to confront the reality that the woman they had treated like nothing had been someone they should have never underestimated. He turned to Darnell, and there was something in his eyes now that Simone had never seen before, something cold and final, as he spoke with a quiet authority that cut deeper than shouting ever could, telling him plainly that he had thrown away a queen for a fraud. And Darnell's confusion barely had time to form before Theodore signaled his head of security, who stepped forward with a file that began unraveling everything in seconds, exposing that Rel Banks wasn't even real, that her true identity was Rochelle Williams, a married woman whose husband was currently deployed overseas, someone who had built a pattern of targeting ambitious men, manipulating them into relationships for access and advantage before disappearing without a trace. And the moment the truth hit the room, Rochelle's composure shattered as she tried to run, heels scraping against the polished floor as she made a desperate break for the exit, only to collide with security waiting for her, stumbling back into a storm of whispers and disbelief as she screamed denials that no longer held any weight. While Theodore's team pulled up footage across the ballroom screens that left no room for doubt, clips of her meeting multiple men in the same week, laughing privately with her real husband about how easy it was to exploit men driven by ego, even rehearsing fake tears before delivering carefully crafted lies. And Darnell's world visibly collapsed as realization set in, his voice cracking as he confronted her, only for Rochelle to drop the act entirely, her bitterness spilling out as she admitted she had used him because he was easy, because he wanted to feel important, because he made himself an easy target, confessing she would have taken everything and disappeared if Simone hadn't ruined it. And in a final desperate move, she lunged toward Simone, but was immediately restrained, dragged out screaming as police moved in, revealing outstanding warrants that sealed her fate, leaving the room in chaos while Simone stood still at the center of it all, composed, steady, carrying the grace her grandmother had taught her. And then came the moment no one expected, Darnell collapsing to his knees in front of her, begging, apologizing, claiming ignorance, insisting it was a mistake, as if that could erase everything he had done. But when Simone looked at him now, she felt nothing but a quiet, distant pity, telling him softly that knowing the truth now didn't change anything, because the damage had already been done, and just when it seemed like it was over, Theodore delivered one final blow, revealing that the company Darnell worked for had been partially sustained by his empire, that their continued support had been tied to Simone's happiness, and that by morning it would all be gone, leaving Darnell to face the collapse of everything he thought defined him. And as panic overtook him, Simone simply reflected his own past cruelty back to him, reminding him that he had discarded her just as easily before turning to leave, only to be stopped by Loretta, who suddenly tried to rewrite the past, claiming ignorance, suggesting things would have been different if they had known who Simone really was. But Simone calmly pulled away, making it clear that her worth had never changed. Only their perception of it had. And that was exactly the problem, refusing the respect that came too late, shutting down Kenneth's attempt to claim family by reminding him that real family doesn't destroy you for entertainment. And when Vanessa, for once without her phone raised, broke down apologizing and offering to undo the damage she had helped spread, Simone's response was firm and unforgettable. Leave it all up. Let the world see it. Let it stand as proof of what happens when people mistake kindness for weakness and think they can erase someone who was never meant to be small in the first place. People need to see what happens when you treat others like they're beneath you. Karma doesn't forget, Theodore said quietly, offering Simone his arm as they walked out of that ballroom together without a single glance back, leaving behind a room full of chaos where Darnell remained on his knees, his family, unraveling under the weight of everything they had just lost. And in the weeks that followed, the fallout came fast and unforgiving, exactly as Theodore had predicted, because without his empire backing it, Darnell's company collapsed, clients pulled out, the board turned on him, and he was fired with his reputation shattered as word spread about how he had treated the daughter of a man no one dared cross. And no matter how many times he called, over 100 attempts, Simone never answered, never gave him access again, even when he showed up at the estate only to be turned away by security. And when he tried to reshape the narrative online, no one listened, because the truth had already spoken louder than anything he could say, while Rochelle faced her own consequences as law enforcement uncovered a trail of fraud, identity theft, and deeper schemes that ensured she would be gone for a long time, her carefully constructed life collapsing just as quickly as it had been built. But perhaps the most telling downfall was the Carter family itself, because their social world turned its back on them almost overnight. Loretta losing the respect and status she once held as doors quietly closed in her face. Kenneth watching his professional life take a hit as clients distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with someone who had publicly disrespected power they now understood, and Vanessa becoming the very thing she once mocked. Her viral video turning into a warning rather than entertainment as opportunities disappeared and apologies came too late to matter. And despite all their attempts to reach Simone afterward, with messages, letters, and desperate efforts to reconnect, she had already learned a lesson that changed everything, that not everyone deserves a place in your life just because they ask for it, and forgiveness isn't something you owe to people who only wanted to ease their own guilt. And when Darnell made one final attempt showing up uninvited at a charity event she was hosting, pleading in front of cameras, claiming he had lost everything and needed her help. Simone didn't react with anger or bitterness, but with calm clarity, reminding him that she had once lost everything too and still found a way forward. And while she wished him healing, she made it clear she would not be part of his journey anymore. And that moment marked the final closing of a chapter that no longer defined her. And in the months that followed, Simone rebuilt her life on her own terms, moving into her father's world while never forgetting where she came from, returning often to the small house her grandmother had filled with love, grounding herself in the values that had shaped her, and channeling everything she had endured into something meaningful by creating Estelle's Hope, a foundation dedicated to helping women escape the kind of silent suffering she had once endured, providing them with resources, support, and a path forward. Because Simone understood something now that she hadn't before. That real power isn't just about wealth or status. It's about using your story to rewrite someone else's ending. And as time moved forward, Simone and Theodore built something neither of them had ever truly had before, a real relationship, not defined by absence or fear, but by presence, honesty, and healing, sharing weekly dinners where he told her stories about her mother, about a love so powerful it still echoed through everything she was, reminding her again and again that her greatest strength wasn't her wealth, but the fact that she had remained kind in a world that had given her every reason not to be. And slowly Simone allowed herself to open up to life again, even to love, meeting Marcus, a man who had known her before the truth came out, before the money, someone who saw her the same way regardless of what she had. And that consistency, that quiet respect, was how she knew he was real, not another illusion, not another test. And on the anniversary of the night that once broke her, Simone returned to her grandmother's grave with fresh flowers and the worn leather journal in her hands, sitting quietly as she spoke the words she had carried in her heart for years, finally understanding that her father's absence had never been abandonment but protection, that her grandmother had given her everything she needed to survive a world that didn't always play fair. And as she opened the journal one last time and read the final letter, every word settled into her like truth she had always known but never fully accepted, that her worth had never been conditional, never tied to status or recognition, but rooted in who she had always been. And as the sun set over Georgia, painting the sky in gold and pink, Simone reflected on the girl she used to be and the woman she had become, realizing that nothing external had truly changed her value, only her understanding of it. And somewhere out there, the people who once tried to break her were still dealing with the consequences of their choices. But she no longer carried them in her thoughts because they no longer deserved that space. Her focus now was forward, on the lives she was changing through her foundation, on building something meaningful alongside her father, on creating a future filled with intention rather than survival. And later that evening, as she stood on the balcony beside Theodore, overlooking the city lights, he asked her if she had any regrets. And after a long pause, she admitted only one, that she wished she had found the truth sooner. But even that came with understanding, because maybe she needed every hardship to become who she was now. And as he placed his arm around her and reminded her of exactly who she was, not just his daughter, but someone unstoppable in her own right, Simone finally felt a sense of peace she had never known before, understanding at last that her value had never been defined by how others treated her, but by who she chose to be despite it all. That strength wasn't found in becoming hard, but in staying soft in a world that rewards the opposite, and that sometimes losing everything isn't the end of your story. It's the moment you finally discover who you were always meant to be. And now that she knew it, truly knew it, there was nothing left in this world that could ever make her forget it again. Because Simone had always been enough. The only difference was that now she believed it.